Life. Great. All right. So today I have Tracy Trachsler here, Managing Director of CV Labs, and I'm super happy to talk to you today and dive a little bit more into the state of the industry, the future, what's happening right now, topics all around digital business. So Tracy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, so maybe you can say just a few words about yourself before we dive into the questions of today.
Sure. So a lot of it's already been covered. My name is Tracy Trachsler. I'm the managing director of CV Labs. CV Labs is the quote unquote ecosystem business of CVVC, so Crypto Valley Venture Capital. And our job is essentially to make sure that the different startups in CVVC's portfolio have a nice way to plug into the wider Web3 ecosystem, as well as to make sure that we're engaging with all of the sort of big players, the up and coming players, the different service providers in the space, and essentially offer a platform to bring all of these different voices together.
Great. Thanks for the intro. Cool. So let's dive right in. So one of the questions that I always love to ask is like, if you had to sum up your essence in just one word, what would that word be and why?
I think depending on who you ask in my family, they would probably all have very different answers to this question. I think the one that hits it sort of on the nose is perhaps curious. I've always been that kid that asked why. I think I used to drive my parents insane with that question already as a toddler. But I'm just the type of personality that really likes to understand why certain things are the way that they are, challenge whether or not that should be the case, etc. So from like reading a lot of books to reading a lot of online articles to conducting experiments, testing, all that kind of stuff. It's always been something that I've thoroughly enjoyed.
Wonderful. Thanks. I love that. I mean, I'm similar in that regards. So I can totally resonate with that. Cool. So let's talk a little bit more about success, but let's make it really personal. So what is your personal definition of success?
It's a very good question. I think it comes down to balance, which I know right now one of the like big topics that I think also has been raised through COVID and sort of the way that it changed our relationship with the workplace and with employers is work-life balance. And so to me, I think success takes the form of being able to, I think, get a certain amount of fulfillment and happiness out of each of the different areas in your life, whether it's your relationships, both, romantic, but also just personal relationships with friends within your family, as well as your own like leisure time, right? Activities and hobbies that you enjoy doing that bring you sort of peace or satisfaction or a sense of accomplishment, coupled with, of course, what you experience on the professional front. And when I like to work. I think I would be bored if I didn't have something to occupy my time. So I think like success to me is across all of these different categories in your life, being able to monitor the level of energy that you're able to put into each of these different categories, which is a never-ending task. I think there's times where you're able to allocate more energy or more time to one thing versus another. But I think success is being able to sort of stabilize this or constantly stabilize this in a manner that makes sure that you're fulfilled socially, professionally, personally, right? Your own mental, physical health, etc. So it's sort of a holistic package, I guess.
Thanks for sharing that. Really interesting point of view. I love it. Cool. So one more thing I want to talk about is a little bit of decision making. So, it's just like we have to make decisions every day, every moment of every day. And sometimes these decisions are maybe easy and sometimes they're more difficult. So I'm just curious, like looking back at your career and what you've done so far, what would you say was one of the most difficult decisions that you ever had to make?
I think different decisions have been difficult for very different reasons. I think when it comes to sort of one of the bigger personal challenges, um, was specifically related to pursuing pursuing a master's degree in Asia. It's something that I'd considered for a very long time. And I was someone who was used to moving around quite a bit when I was younger, so that wasn't in a sense new, right? The idea of going into uncharted territory. But what was new was doing it completely on my own. Usually, previously I'd been moving around with family or with close family friends, and so I think that the biggest personal challenge there really was deciding whether or not I trusted myself enough to take on a completely different culture, a completely different language, um, in a setting that was far enough away from home to where it wasn't just a quick, like, 2 hour flight or a quick drive, but you essentially had to travel half a day before you were back on sort of familiar ground. I remember at the time I thought about it quite a bit. I weighed the pros and cons of, why do I feel like I need to do this? What happens if I fail? If I realize after 6 months it was a horrible idea. But looking back, it's also one of the, I think, decisions I'm most proud of, because it certainly was a personal challenge, absolutely. But it just opened so many doors and gave me such a deep appreciation, one for, the familiar, but also for this opportunity to explore something completely different. And that's something that stayed with me ever since. And I hope that I get to hold on to that feeling for a while longer.
Cool. And how did it turn out? How did this decision turn out at the end?
Fantastic. I have to say, genuinely, looking back, I mean, I've always, hindsight is always 2020. So I think once you're no longer, once you're no longer in like that university period, you look back and realize how nice that period actually was, because never again in your life do you have such easy and unencumbered access to absolute experts in their field, endless opportunity to explore topics that you may find interesting or that you may discover that you actually find interesting. So in general, I have a deep sense of appreciation for that sort of experience of attending university, being around that real sort of opportunity to gather knowledge. But particularly, I think particularly the decision to go to South Korea was just one that I look back on very, very fondly, because again, it wasn't just a completely different educational environment. It was a completely different lifestyle, a completely different group of people that you just got to know better. And it's something that I'm very, very deeply grateful for still to this day.
That's good to hear. Wonderful. Now let's talk a little bit about the industry. And I had so many conversations with people, in the industry, but also outside, on this topic of crypto and adoption, and also the experience with crypto. Maybe like that may be the actual user experience and customer experience of using DeFi apps and using the blockchain, but then also like the experience of like sometimes trust issues, and sometimes like of course, like we all know what happened over the past couple of months. It's already been many months. I feel last year just lots of things happened, like the collapse of Anchor with Luna, and the FTX debacle, and all these kinds of things, which on a certain level put a bit of a stretch on trust into this ecosystem, right? Even though it has nothing to do with technology whatsoever, but at the end of the day, it's looking at this through the eyes of the masses. Nobody cares. It's crypto, so that's just what it is, right? So I'm just like curious a little bit of from your point of view, because I think you're seeing so many things all day long, and I'm just curious, like, where do you feel we stand today, and where are we heading in the next couple of years?
So I think particularly when it comes to overall user experience, we have a very, very long road still ahead of us. I think particularly for those that have been in the industry for quite a while, you tend to forget just how big the initial barrier to entry actually is. I think one of my favorite reality check moments was actually last year during Consensus when CoinDesk sort of experimented with this airdrop, like token airdrop that you were able to utilize and unlock within sort of the realms of the conference. And all of a sudden you had these, plenty of crypto native people, or at least people that are actively working in the industry, struggle with certain things like, oh, well, how do I now claim my desk, and how do I now redeem it, and how do I link my wallet to this and this. And it was fascinating to see these people that are that should be sort of the easiest target group, realize just how many steps you still have to go to in order to onboard as a customer. And I think that trend sort of still is very, very much the status quo within the industry itself. Explaining to someone how to set up a MetaMask wallet, or explaining to someone how to onboard themselves onto an exchange is still a very difficult task. And again, you mentioned that trust factor. I think those working within the industry, there's still a lot of trust in the technology itself. But if anything, what the last year or more has demonstrated is that you cannot completely take out the human factor out of the technology, right? So at the end of the day, you still have people that are developing these products, and a lot of very good salespeople, a lot of very good marketing people, that are able to utilize or utilize certain things to their advantage, and the average, let's say, end user isn't going to be so deeply familiar with the tech that they're going to be able to assess in any reasonable way to what extent the tech is robust, right? And instead, you're looking to the companies that offer sleek user experiences. You're looking to the companies that make it easy, right? That put it at your fingertips. And that then becomes a key to success. And that means that, again, you have companies that are able to succeed without necessarily having to rely too much on that currency of trust, because there's or without, let's put it this way, without, they very much rely on the currency of trust, but they don't necessarily have to back up those claims, because again, assessing that is very, very difficult. And so I think it's also on us as an industry to make sure that those that have the capacity to offer a proper assessment of sort of the technological stack, or the tech layer, should then be the ones that are able to sort of openly discuss the strengths and weaknesses that the industry is currently experiencing. So I think there we still have a very, very long way to go. One of the positive things, though, is that with sort of the growth of the industry, with all of these new projects that are coming out, and we are seeing some large levels of adoptions of particularly exchange apps, trading apps. I think the DeFi space brought in, again, a whole new user crowd as well. And with each sort of growth of a new market within the industry, you also get a lot of new talent that's coming in, that is offering that critical eye, that is questioning why things are done a certain way, why do they need to be done that way? Can they be changed? How can we make this more friendly? It's always good to get an outside perspective, because again, I think the longer you've been in the industry, the more you forget just how cumbersome certain tasks are for those that aren't already well familiar with it. So we're getting there. Again, long road ahead, but we're getting there.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing. Just one thing I want to dive into a little bit. I'm just super curious about your opinion when it comes to the experience, user customer experience, because so I've been in this space not for very long, but maybe for 2 years or so, and I feel like I've been part of everything except for FTX. I have money in Luna, I had money in or in Anchor, I have money in Celsius, and some other places. And so I was yeah, I experienced that crackdown myself, which is interesting because I think it's a more powerful way to learn if you actually have money on the line than if you just watch it from the outside. But apart from what happened there, I mean, I still remember like how I got my Swiss francs into Celsius. Just that is that process is incomparable to basically me sending money to you, or me sending money to um, a bank or something like that. I mean, there were so many different layers, and just going from conversion rates in fiat to stable coin to different exchanges to eventually end up at Celsius. And I'm just curious, like, I mean, that's just one example, right? But there's also like with DeFi, with DeFi places actually getting your fiat money, and Swiss francs is maybe the worst, to actually get somewhere, because of like there's not that many places where you can lend out digital Swiss franc, or a digital Swiss franc, a Swiss franc stable coin right now. Maybe a few crypto banks, right, or one, maybe one crypto bank. But I'm just curious, like from your perspective, why is it so difficult? Why is it so, like, the experience, why is it so broken and not smooth and not seamless? Is it just because the technology isn't ready? Is it just because it's very fragmented? Is it because, from your perspective, why is it the way it is?
I mean, the dream is always sort of that seamless user experience, right? Everyone dreams of the one click, one stop shop, etc. I think because this is a very young industry, there of course is still a lot of ground to cover in order to define, what exactly that experience needs to look like in order to qualify as seamless. Um, the other thing that you have to consider is, one, for the example that you mentioned specifically, these are financial services, and decentralized financial services, which means that you have different regulatory environments, different licensing requirements, etc., that make each individual step cumbersome. And there are very few tools at the moment that are able to sort of carry a user from start to finish, through that experience. You also have, you have to consider a lot of these projects are being developed independently of one another. And while we're slowly but surely getting closer to, like easy plug-in solutions, etc., we're still at the very front. So I think the biggest factor here is just the age of the industry itself. I mean, when you look at what it initially took to, implement checkout systems in the early days of the internet, right? It was a similarly frustrating experience because it was something that was completely foreign at the time. I think now we're in a phase where we know, we know what has to be done. But again, this is an industry that is dealing with, let's say, a constantly changing regulatory environment, a government that is still trying very actively to understand the implications of the technology itself. And there is, I think, a certain, I don't want to say fear, but maybe a certain respect of being able to, let's say, implement that ease of use, particularly within the realm of crypto specifically. Now, again, I will say that isn't just crypto. I think Web3/blockchain as a whole, is still in that sort of finding period, right? How do you make things easily accessible? I think there are some areas where we are further along than others. NFTs, funny enough, because it was something that had such, specifically art-based NFTs, had such easy mass appeal in that sense, that I think that challenge was something that people had to overcome a bit quicker. And so you saw solutions like integrating integrating card-based payments, etc., into certain NFT based trading platforms much quicker than in other areas. And again, I think a part of that is regulatory constraints that make that process simpler. But the other thing is also just sheer demand, because they realize that you need to be able to offer this. But you also see, things like MoonPay, etc. That's it's trying to make that bridge. And I think in the next 2 to 3 years, that'll become sort of the standard, is moving into sort of easy access. But again, there are certain, let's say, core elements that need to be in place in order for that to become a reality. And the challenge to the industry right now is making sure that those, we're either contributing to making sure that those elements are in place. So whether that's talking to regulators, whether that's collaborating within the industry itself with the different players. You see a lot of the larger players that are now entering into that like M&A phase, right? Again, there's a reason for that, because they're looking to bring all of these different elements within sort of one nicely packaged shell. So we're moving past this, I'm building my solution, you're building your solution, you're building your solution, into, okay, thinking on a wider scale, how do these different elements actually plug into each other? And I think that's that's sort of the direction that we're heading into. But again, certainly because of the sort of fairly young age of the industry, one that we're just scratching the surface of at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing. It's really like, I like the perspective of like the age of the industry, because it's always kind of a reality check, I feel, as well. I remember it was, I don't know, there was some conference I was at, and they compared like the different currencies. Like they had like on, I think that 4 different columns on the screen. It was Swiss francs, euros, dollars, and Bitcoin. And like, kind of like they had Bitcoin trump everywhere except on the track record. It was basically like, well, the only currency that doesn't have a track record is Bitcoin, because it's only been around for like 10 years or something like that. And that sounds like interesting timelines, right? 100 years, 150 years, 120 years, maybe 50 or 30 years. And 10 years is kind of like, it's really dropping. It's not really, doesn't fit in here, right? It's really interesting, like especially in the world of finance, where things have been around for a very long time, but also not forever, right? Banks haven't been around forever. Credit cards, haven't been around forever. And even I remember, like, there was some really in-depth article I wrote. I read about the introduction of credit cards, at the very beginning. And like, suddenly it was an uproar when it comes to regulations and all these kinds of things, right? And it's interesting because when something, we don't remember that, of course, right? Because now it's just like, of course, like, that's just the way it is, right? Same with banks and credit cards and non-physical money and things like that, which is like, now we never even talk about it. But it feels like just even maybe a decade or two ago, it wasn't like that, right? It was like, what do you mean you don't want to pay cash? Like, what do you mean? Like, and today it's like, what do you mean you want to pay cash? Like, we don't take cash.
It's a fair point. I think you also raise a good point there when it comes to the importance of institutional buy-in, right? Again, when you look at why currently, for example, the process of like sending fiat to an exchange, or better yet, sending fiat back from an exchange into your bank account, why that is so cumbersome is because these industries are still very much just getting to know each other. And at the end of the day, I think once we reach a point where particularly the world of traditional finance no longer treats the sort of digital asset space as this great unknown, but is willing to familiarize themselves with it, is willing to take a look at how they integrate it into their sort of existing structures, how they alter their structures in order to become sort of digital asset friendly. I think that's that's one of those key building blocks that I mentioned earlier, right? That needs to be in place. One of the nice things that we're seeing now is you're seeing, when you look at, who is getting hired at a lot of Web3 companies, et cetera, oftentimes there's people from traditional industry that are making the switch because they're so convinced that this is a tool that can revolutionize the space that they come from, right? A lot of it is sort of fueled by everyday frustrations that they experienced before. And so I think they see it, right? Now it's just about sort of getting it over there and making sure that it gets implemented. But once you have that buy-in from the institutional side, then there are so many possibilities that open up, because you don't have to go through 10 different steps in order to make sure that each one is KYC, AML compliant, etc. And you don't have to worry that once you try to sort of move your money back from an exchange, for example, into your bank account, you suddenly risk getting flagged or getting banned, or these are all stories that I think we all have heard, right, of individuals that suddenly find their funds locked because they tried to send money to an exchange that for some reason the bank flagged as a suspicious transaction, and so you are never again able to make that transaction. So it's certainly a factor that plays a key role on the digital asset adoption side. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mentioned like these worlds coming closer together. It's so true. Like, just like a couple of days ago or last week, I think I talked to one of the executives at the Cardano Foundation, and he joined, I think 2 years ago or something, from a private bank. And of course, Frederick, right, is a banker. Maybe I'm not sure if I would call him a banker still, right? But he's a banker at the end of the day, right?
He wears too many baseball caps for that, so I think he did
Yeah, maybe, right. And it's not the only place. Crypto banks is maybe the most obvious place, right? But what I also find interesting is the other side of like, a couple of weeks ago, I got to know the head of digital assets at a retail bank. I would never have assumed they would have to do anything with it. They even have a venture arm that has a very specific focus of Web3 and digital assets. Basically, it's really interesting. And I just see this pop up everywhere. Like, people inside of banking, traditional banks, private banks, retail banks, cantonal banks, whatever your flavor of the month is, it's like it's popping up everywhere. So I'm curious, like, just to end this segment on this topic a little bit, but I'm just like curious on your perspective, like, where do we stand on that integration? Maybe the integration is the wrong word, but maybe where do we stand on like traditional banking, traditional finance, and maybe the future of fintech or whatever we want to call it? Where do you feel do we stand there right now? Is it still like an avoidance? And I'm just like, I'm just to be provocative, I'm just saying, like, from both sides, this side avoiding this one and this one avoiding this one, is it still avoidance? Is it like more like, okay, maybe let's get to know each other a little bit, or is it like, okay, this is the future?
I think the era of skepticism that we had in the late like 2010s, right, where it was just by default dismissed as a tool for money laundering, dismissed as terrorist financing, etc. I think we're not having those conversations anymore. One of the things that certainly is the case, when you look, a lot of these banks now have some sort of exposure to digital assets, in some way, shape, or form. But what is most interesting is that I would say almost every bank has a team in place that either publicly or sort of in a more secret R&D type setting is taking a look at digital assets, because they can't afford not to. Even the ones that are, and you're sitting there and going, yeah, but these guys say, no, we have zero. No, even the ones that say that they have no interest in digital assets, that it's not something that they're taking a look at, even they will have someone on the inside that that has to tackle the topic. I think there's increasing pressure from the client side. You have, you have clients that are asking how to get exposure, and at this point in time, not having an answer is not an option. So if you can't offer any sort of guidance as a relationship manager, for example, to the question of, look, I'm interested in getting some sort of exposure on the digital asset side, how do I go about doing that? Even if it's something that they don't offer, they at least have to be well versed enough in order to, direct the client somewhere. So I think that's the first thing. But then the other thing is, I think, you see increasingly there's the realization that, again, there are a lot of the applications for the tech within, I would say, sort of the core banking infrastructure isn't sexy, isn't, it isn't exciting on the surface, but it's just an optimization of current processes that, because they make things more efficient, is revolutionary. It's not necessarily something that, newspaper. However, you do see that those are the things that are getting them interested, right? Again, tokenized bonds, tokenized, tokenized share certificates, etc. These are all topics that they're taking a closer look at. And you have some large names that are absolutely leading the charge and being very vocal about their buy-in into the tech, right? I'm thinking of like the JP Morgans. It's a very good example. They're very open about sort of the testing that they're doing, the MVPs that they've built, the sort of test transactions, etc., that they've done over the past 2 years. And I think all of these very public things are mirrored on a private level in some way, shape, or form amongst the bigger players. Even if they don't talk about it, it's happening. And there's, sort of a concerted effort now that we've seen, particularly when it comes to education, like internal education, making sure that there is an exchange between the industry itself and sort of the traditional banking sector or traditional finance sector. And again, I think that cross-pollination of talent is a huge part of driving that ever closer and driving it forward, because you have that exchange of knowledge and a shared interest in order to make sure that this succeeds in the long run. If you're going to ask me for a timeline, I have no idea. At the end of the day, we know that particularly large traditional financial institutions are not necessarily the fastest at implementing quote unquote innovative new tech. However, again, I think what has become clear is that it's no longer a topic that they can afford to ignore, not just because digital assets perform well as an asset class, but again, also because of what the underlying sort of tech means or could mean for changes in sort of core banking infrastructure. And that's, I think, in the long term, what will sort of carry it across the finish line.
Yeah, thanks for diving into this. Really appreciate it. Cool. So there's one more final question that I have for you, which is a place I always like to go, and it's very, very far out into the future. But let's imagine you're 80 years now, and you're looking back at your life and everything that has happened in the world and how the world has changed over the past many, many years. At that point, looking back, what would you love to see changed in the world?
Oof. I think, to be honest, I think that's a very, very difficult question to answer for one reason, because when you look at just the pace of innovation, it's unprecedented now. It'll be even more unprecedented tomorrow. It'll be even more unprecedented the day after. And so I think, what did they say? You always overestimate like how much changes in 2 years, and underestimate how much changes in 10, or something along those lines. And so I mean, 40, 50 years from now, it's difficult to anticipate what all will change. I am 100% convinced that every facet of our life will have evolved in some way, shape, or form. What exactly that looks like is difficult. If you ask me what I would like to see changed, difficult to make a prediction or to ask for something, particularly on sort of the tech front, because one of the things that it's always interesting, there's an ongoing debate on to what extent do you let ethics sort of slow down technological innovation, etc. But I think perhaps sort of the most obvious one that I feel comfortable enough to say, here's something I'd like to see change, is specifically in and around health tech. We are at a stage now where we're slowly but surely able to gather just immense volumes of data about, our daily life, and a lot of it, then slips easily into sort of optimal performance, etc., biohacking, all that kind of stuff. But even just on a more basic level, the doors that sort of technological innovation in the medical space opens to combating diseases, that right now still have the power to eradicate large numbers of people, particularly in, unfortunately, usually in less developed regions. Seeing breakthroughs in sort of the medical sciences, seeing, advanced treatments, etc. At the end of the day, we all want to live longer, live healthier, etc. But at the end of that, that's still a privilege for most people. And so if we're getting to, if we're getting to a place where we're able to extend and offer health to everyone across the board, I think that'll be, just maybe from a humane from sort of a humane standpoint, I think that'll be sort of a greater accomplishment.
Cool. Thanks for sharing. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all the inputs and insights, and for spending half an hour, 40 minutes with us today, and diving into all these topics. Really appreciate it. And
it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon.